Senator Levin, I want to get your thoughts on something he was just talking about there. He said oftentimes companies figure they don't have the talent they need, maybe ready to go in this, and they are looking indeed to bring immigrants in. In fact, there's a big push by this governor to make this a more welcoming state to immigrants, to invite those in with advanced degrees who can fill some of those high-tech jobs that you were discussing moments ago in the R&D departments of TACOM, TARDEC, and the automotive companies. What will it take to get our people up to speed so that the immigration rules are not as necessary?
Well, cutting back on education would be a crime and a shame as far as I'm concerned. And if you want to take a look at what the stakes are in terms of the future, compare the budgets. I'm not going to get overly partisan here. Compare the budgets that are being offered by the Republicans in the House. Take a look at what they'll do to education. Higher education plus K through 12, compare them to the president's budget on education and make up your own mind. If you decide education is important, job training and retraining is important, how much we put into math and science and engineering, if you think that's all important to our future, and I do, make your own comparison on those budgets. And there's very vast differences. And what this gets right down to, and I think the most important job that we face in the next few months, is going to be whether or not we can avoid those automatic, across-the-board, totally unprioritized, mindless, draconian cuts, which are going to happen in January automatically. It's called sequestration, unless there's some kind of a grand bargain that's reached before then. And that's going to take some compromise. There are a whole new set of members of Congress that think compromise is a dirty word. And we have to overcome that. Frankly, I hope the business community will step up on the issue of revenues. And this really goes to the heart of the matter. We've done a lot of cuts in spending already, about $700 billion. We've done nothing on the revenue side yet, nothing on the entitlement side yet. We're going to have to come up with a grand bargain where we're going to do some more deficit reduction. But as you heard from Fareed Zakaria, one offer was $3 of spending cuts to $1 of additional revenue. That was rejected by the Republicans. The president went higher than that, much higher than I would do, by the way, $4 of spending cuts to $1 of additional revenue. I would do what was done during the Reagan years when there were 3 deficit reduction bills averaging 40% additional revenues, 60% spending cuts. Clinton, 50-50, 50% additional revenues, 50% additional spending cuts. And the same thing with the first President Bush, roughly 50-50, a little bit less than that. But the Republicans have drawn a line in the sand. No additional revenues. You heard Mr. Zakaria talk about that. We cannot reach a deal. We cannot have deficit reduction. We cannot avoid those draconian cuts of the type that you're talking about, job training and education, unless the Republicans get off that ideologically driven absolute position of no additional revenues. Now, I could take time that we don't have here to tell you what I think would be a fair balance, but that's not what you have. I'm just simply saying, unless the Republicans get off that pledge that they've signed of no additional revenues, we are in a position where you're going to get these automatic cuts, which I believe will return us to a recession, as well as uninvesting in the future.
Well, I was going to hold off on the dysfunction part till a little bit later on, but we'll go there since you brought it up here. This is an election year, obviously. You've got a situation where you've got a presidential election coming up in November. Of course, the sequestration cuts you're talking about are coming up in January, as would the expiration of the Bush-era tax cuts. This is like a perfect storm of I guess we'll call it inactivity on big issues in Congress. What's the likelihood of any that we'll actually see any real action on something significant this year?
50-50 during a lame duck session, less than 50-50 beforehand, although frankly...
The vote on the Bush tax cuts is going to come right before the election.
No, the Bush...
In the House.
Well, they may have a vote on Bush tax cuts
it's not going
in the House, but that's not going to go anywhere because the Bush tax cuts, if you extend those cuts, will extend the cuts to not only middle income folks, but to upper bracket folks, and we cannot afford not to have an increase in the rate for upper 1%. We cannot afford it. Now, maybe there are, I'm sure, a few folks in this room who will fit in that category, but we simply cannot do significant deficit reduction without major loophole closing, and I wish we had the time to describe some of them. One of them, Facebook just got a $16 billion tax deduction. $16 billion tax deduction to Facebook to equal the tax increase or the capital gains, which the people who own Facebook stock are going to get, but the company gets a $16 billion. They will not pay taxes, Facebook, for the next 10 or 15 years. They get a check back from the federal government, a refund of $500 million. I don't know how we can accept that kind of a tax loophole. There are tax loopholes called carried interest that hedge funds get because one member of Congress was able to write in a loophole that basically helps hedge fund managers pay a capital gains tax on something which everybody, I think, would call ordinary income, but they're treated as a capital gain. Again, you got to get into the details of some of these loopholes, but that's revenue. And that's something which there's now a rigid position against, including by the presidential candidate, Governor Romney.